My unfaithful wife cheated on me for over 15 years, which I turned a blind eye to, and soon she just left me. My wife had been sleeping with other men behind my back for 15 years before she left me. To start, I will contextualize by stating my wife just left me. I have had problems with her behavior for years, and it has been slowly eating away at me. I'm going to try to include all of my thoughts here to give a clear picture. Up until about a month ago, we had been married for nearly 10 years and together for about 16. I began dating my wife when she was in her first year of graduate school. I can honestly say I was head over heels in love with her. She was very much the opposite of me. I am introverted, opinionated, blunt, and far from charming. She is excessively extroverted, malleable to opinions depending upon the circle, and extremely high energy. I never at first thought of her as someone shallow, obsessed with opinion, or superficial. Over time, that opinion has very much changed. I learned early in our dating that my future wife was quite promiscuous. A good number of her friends were people she had formerly slept with, and she had a story of making out at one point with nearly every guy friend she had. At that time, I thought, okay, she is a young woman in college. That is just normal behavior. I never thought of myself as a jealous person and had never really experienced jealousy. Again, this would change drastically. During the very first week I was seeing her, she told me not to call or visit her because her close friend, Mark, was coming into town and staying at her place. She said she wanted to be alone with someone she could relate to. I decided to put this to the back of my mind. After all, just because it was a guy didn't mean anything, right? The reason this is bookmarked in my mind is because I would come into contact with Mark a lot, and I found out that my future wife, let's call her Sarah, had a past romantic history with Mark. Furthermore, their interactions in my presence would often be interesting. My wife's accounts often varied, so putting together exactly what was going on was hard to do. According to Sarah, she and Mark had crushes on each other when she was dating her first boyfriend. According to her, though she had many sexual partners, she only had one boyfriend. The time frames on her relationship with this boyfriend differ on the account. Sometimes she was dating him from her junior year of high school until her sophomore year in college. Another account had her dating him until her freshman year of college. She has said before that she used this boyfriend sexually after they had split. She also said they were on again, off again. She also stated at one point she and Mark were behaving like a couple, but then he slept with one of her friends. Later, she said that she had betrayed him first. I kind of think she was sleeping with Mark while her boyfriend was under the impression they were still dating. I am outlining this because I wonder if the same thing hasn't happened to me, if it isn't repetitive behavior. Over the first 2 years of our dating, we were regular barflies. Sarah was an admitted flirt and often flirted in front of me. To put it lightly, she didn't just flirt in front of me, but often spoke openly and in detail of her past sexual experiences with her former sexual partners, again, often in front of me. Other than Mark, she had another recurring friend with benefits. We will call him Steve. Now, Steve turned out to be a legitimately good person we are friends to this day. At the time, I came to hate him. He made it a habit to talk about the things he and Sarah would do sexually again, with her, and in front of me. It's hard to listen to someone in your girlfriend's past talk about the person you're dating, like sitting on their face with her replying, "Yes, I was." Other things during these first 2 years would bother me. I would often meet her out to find her engaged in close conversation with a stranger and couldn't be bothered to say hello to me. She often ended up surrounded by an impenetrable wall of guys, and I wouldn't even be able to speak to her for hours. Whenever Mark came over, he always took the seat closest to her, and they sat very close. When he played video games, she would bring him a bowl of snacks and hold and light it for him. She would interrupt me to listen to what Mark had to say all the time. For a time, Mark was sleeping with the downstairs neighbor, but when coming to see her, he would always head upstairs to see Sarah first. On one occasion, her best friend came to visit her, and again she did not want me to come over so she could be alone with her friend. This one was a female school friend, but she ended up inviting her close friend Steve, as well as 4 other people over. She did this again on a night that was just supposed to be a girls' night I was not to call or visit. She ended up inviting 4 guys, not including me, to hang out for a girls' night. I really was trying to let these things go, but it became harder and harder to ignore them. I was becoming anxious and insecure. I should also mention I had a daughter that I saw every other weekend. During this period, I fell into a period of unemployment. It was very hard to find a job, and I fell behind in child support. It was during one of our many recessions. At this point, Sarah was doing an internship, and I tried to maintain contact with her. It was disheartening, though, because whenever I called her, she sounded completely disinterested and would often carry on conversations with her friends around her while on the phone with me. One thing I took personally was when I had to go to court once because I was behind on my payments. I almost went to jail but cut a deal with my daughter's mother. I had just found a job and asked her to give me 2 weeks to get together over $1,000. Naturally, I was stressed and ended up having to borrow money. I called Sarah to vent and maybe seek comfort. But again, she was not only disinterested, she was munching on her Chipotle and talking animatedly with her friends over the phone. No interest, no worry, no empathy, nothing. A few weeks later, she was going on a trip to an amusement park with people she knew from her internship. Again, she did not want me to come, but I found out others on the trip brought their significant others. Like I said, this crap builds and becomes hard to forget. She would also go to a Christmas party with Mark in which she admitted Mark was hitting on her. Let's skip ahead another year. She moves home and we have a conversation about moving in together. I get a small inheritance at the time that allows us to find a place. I get a job in her area and we move in together. After nearly 2.5 years of ignoring her inconsiderate behavior, I finally talk to her about how much her flirting bothers me. She tells me a story about being at a nearby bar while I was gone, and she stated she told the bartender, "I would totally sleep with you if I was single." I basically said I didn't need to hear that, and the next moment she got pissed, started screaming, and claimed she never said that, even though she had literally just related the story to me. I quickly began to find out that Sarah had no tolerance whatsoever for criticism of her character. She hated it and got violently angry when questioned. Also, Mark texted her late at night during this period, and I saw what he texted her. "When do I get to see that fine body again?" Time went by, and everything was actually all right, better than before, in fact. We established a close group of friends. She and my daughter were getting closer. There were very few, if any, fights. Everything was great. In this group were her cousin and cousin's husband. This is important, by the way, we'll call them Emily and John. The only thing that was not great during this time was our sex life. For reasons I cannot explain, our lovemaking life wasn't just slowing down, it was completely stopping. Sarah had almost no interest in intimacy. After about 3 years, this group of friends fell apart for various reasons. During this time, Sarah and I became engaged. Things were still pretty okay between myself, Sarah, my daughter, and our friendship with Emily and John. After a few years, we got married with John presiding over the ceremony. Another year went by and things started to get dark, very dark. Emily found out John had been cheating on her for years, and the two got divorced. Emily started seeking consolation from Sarah, which was natural, they were friends and family. But then came a very strange twist. Emily decided to satisfy her midlife crisis by going out bar hopping and boy hunting like crazy. Now, that alone is not the strange part. She insisted on taking my wife with her almost every other night as her wingwoman. At this time, I worked a job that mandated sometimes 3 to 4 times a week, where I was often there from 3 p.m. to 7 a.m. My wife was going out meeting guys while I was at work. She was less interested in intimacy than ever at this point. She often said it was because she was tired, but she had plenty of energy for going out. At one point, she gleefully bragged about a bouncer hitting on her and the bartender helping him along. Apparently, he told her, "Well, you must be here looking for something." I just want to say a few things about this incident, by the way. First, when I would go to this bar with her, she seemed awfully friendly with this bartender, let's call him George. One night during her birthday, she basically jumped at him and gave him a very close hug. She would later say he hugged her, but she was so drunk that night she fell flat on her face before even getting to the bar. I was still very sober. When I vented this to one of our friends, all I had to say was Sarah and George, and this friend literally broke out into tears. This was the most suspicious part. Later, someone who knew my wife and held a party my wife frequented would show up at work. When he learned where I lived, he asked if I knew Sarah and her boyfriend George. This might have been a mistake, but it's a hell of a coincidence. Also, there was a joke around the bar that George was not well endowed, but was good at other things. Later, Sarah would relate to me how disappointing it is to have sex with someone not very well endowed. She said she made love with this one guy who was small but was good at other things. I might be reading too much into that part, I don't know. Something else strange happened at this time. There was a period of 2 months where Sarah and I had literally no sex. Lovemaking had been an issue for years by now, but we had sporadic moments of intimacy. During this period, there was literally nothing. What is strange is that Sarah missed her period for a month and was afraid she might be pregnant. She was or wasn't. I couldn't help wondering why she would think it was a possibility if she was only sleeping with me. I brought it up once and she characteristically flipped out. After this, she started taking birth control and our sex life still stagnated. Around this time, we attended a family wedding. I recall that after the wedding, she was drunk and started talking about skinny dipping in the hotel swimming pool. My dad and brothers went to bed, and so did I. I had been up for at least 24 hours because of work. She ended up going with my cousin's husband while I lay down. I actually woke up 2 hours later, and she wasn't there. She was in the morning, but she claimed they didn't go skinny dipping and that she came right back, which I knew wasn't true. Later, Sarah went to Emily's house for a pool day. She took my daughter with her. One of our acquaintances, let's call him Frank, was there. Well, Sarah told me about how Frank and Emily were highly inebriated, and Frank hit on her right in front of my daughter. I would later mention this, and Sarah got angry because she was worried I would piss off Emily or others present. It was at this point that I realized my wife cared far more about what those in her social circle thought than what I did. Eventually, the constant going out, including on my days off without me, stopped when Emily met someone new and eventually remarried. After that, by the way, Sarah almost never heard from Emily. I'm going to be completely honest, VJJ. I started emotionally distancing myself and even numbing myself to the idea of my wife being with another person. At this point, I was even trying to make myself not care about sex. All of this was making me anxious. I even started having panic attacks. She started to notice the distancing, not the panic attacks. I told her about one I had when I was over at her cousin's during a Super Bowl party. I had another one before that at my previous job, where I was sent to the hospital with extremely high blood pressure. I blacked out. So now, to the recent present, around 2020, a lot of things happened. I lost my job, got on unemployment, but the unemployment was rescinded, putting me in debt. I was accused of endangering another person at work and ended up going to court, and now I'm on probation. I fell into a whirlwind of depression and anxiety. I felt paralyzed and didn't want to even leave home. I was becoming short-tempered and unmotivated all during the pandemic. Sarah had started a new career, and being the extrovert she is, was not taking being stuck inside well. Before the pandemic got really serious, Sarah went to Florida for work training. There was a night when she went to a Caribbean club and was pursued by one of the patrons. Apparently, the chef came out to tell her how beautiful she was, which struck me as odd. If the chef was in the back, how did he know to come out and tell a random stranger how she looked? Again, maybe I'm reading too much into this. Well, she called me once in the night to tell me these guys were really making her want to smoke weed. She called me again, supposedly on her way home, when an unfamiliar voice started screaming into the phone. I mean, it was so loud this person had to have his mouth to the receiver. Anyway, she called me back and told me it was the guy who pursued her. He was an Uber driver and pulled over on the other side of the street to offer her a ride. This is what she told me while she was drunk. Sober, she said she bumped into him in person while walking out of the club. But when she talked to me that night, she said she was already out of the club walking home. We both started going to therapy. Well, in the months leading up to her leaving, she was staying at work later and later. Said it was because she had so much work, but had no problem getting out if there was a dinner with work friends or a ball game or something. I went to her work friend's house with her once, sober the entire time. At one point in the night, they started intimately holding hands and staring at each other. I am not mistaken there. I saw what I saw. This was a female co-worker with a boyfriend. 3 days following this, Sarah says to me, "You know, I would still totally have a threesome, just not with you. That would be weird." Sarah started working out and spending more time on her appearance. She got home later and later. I was working a 1 a.m. to 10 a.m. shift, and she routinely got home when I had only 4 to 5 hours of sleep. She went out one day to a 5-hour book club when we hadn't seen each other, and got home right when I needed to go to bed. She refused to be careful with her weed around the house, even though I was on probation. She would hang a bag of her stuff right by the door and leave her grinder out. Any attempt I made to talk about it was met with rage and shouting. Anytime I vented, I was met with criticism and harsh reprimands, whereas she expected me to just listen, and I did, for the most part. There were times when my frustration bubbled to the surface, and I snapped not physically. I would never hit her. The only subjects she was interested in talking about anymore were her fitness goals and her job. She became increasingly more critical of me, which just caused me to be more silent and more frustrated. All the frustration came to a head over a single incident. 2 years prior, I became my daughter's primary guardian and her mom moved to Texas. Well, her mother waited until the last minute to schedule a flight, and the only days where work did not interfere with one of our schedules was on the weekend, particularly her schedule. Apparently, my daughter's mother could not find a weekend flight that was continuous. This was found out by Sarah, who decided to contact her. I'll be honest, I did not consider it our responsibility to arrange the flight for my daughter's mother. As a matter of fact, it is in the custody agreement that she is responsible for scheduling and financing travel to and from Texas. Sarah did not communicate to me my daughter's mother's inability to find a weekend flight, or that Sarah took it upon herself to reach out. Sarah also took it upon herself to agree to a midweek time to take my daughter to the airport. What she did communicate to me was my daughter's mother had scheduled a flight to leave early in the morning on a Wednesday. The airport is 2 hours away. She told me the flight would leave at 7 a.m. at the latest, and she expected to be home by 10 a.m. at the latest. Now, since Sarah had work at 9 a.m., I figured she had arranged the day off, especially if she intended to be back by 10 a.m. at the latest. These were the talking points I was given and had knowledge of. Sarah got a hotel near the airport and asked if I wanted to come with her. I did end up having that night off. However, I had not slept in days, was absolutely exhausted, and had a therapy session the next day at 11 a.m. Traffic in the area around the airport can get heavy approaching 8 o'clock to 9 a.m., and I was afraid of missing my session, which was part of my probation, meaning missing it could lead to a contempt of court order. In actuality, the flight was leaving at 6 a.m. I was not told this, and Sarah would get home at 8 a.m. However, under the impression she was counting on driving through heavy traffic after a flight leaving at 7 a.m. and planning to be back no later than 10 a.m., I thought it would be cutting it close. I declined to go with my wife to the hotel. When she tried to ask me again, sleep-deprived and annoyed at her constantly leaving paraphernalia everywhere and paying no regard to my schedule, I snapped at her. She left angry, got back the next morning, and still went to work. She had not requested the day off and would not call off. That night we had a huge argument. She asked how long it had been since we had been happy. I told her it was since the time she was going out with her cousin. The weekend following, she stated that something broke in her that night and she didn't want to pretend anymore. She said she didn't think we should be together anymore and that when I told her the time for which I had been unhappy, it broke her heart. I asked her if she knew why I said that. She said no, and I outlined a good deal of what I wrote here, though not everything. She said she was going to her parents' for a few days, then loaded up way more things than I felt she could have fit into her parents' tiny house. I haven't seen her since. She didn't even come to personally talk about our situation with my daughter after she got back, which devastated my daughter. I don't know for certain, but I can't help but feel there was something more to this. Maybe not, though. Maybe it was a series of really bad coincidences brought on by our differing personalities. Still, I can't shake the feeling that there is something else. Update 1. As many pointed out, it didn't really need to be confirmed, but my wife confessed to a friend that when she was going out with her cousin, she had a threesome. I'm guessing it was more than a threesome with her cousin and the bouncer I mentioned in my original post. She was also recently caught texting her other lover before she left. I know people keep saying this is fixation, but it isn't. I'm furious, and I can't stop thinking about it, not that my wife deserves forgiveness. That is not what I mean. I just don't want to think about her ever. I want her to disappear forever from my thoughts. I hate her so much. I hate her for dragging me around people she was sleeping with and probably laughing about it. I hate her for developing a bond my daughter doesn't want to break and then leaving her after my daughter's mother did the same. I hate her for trying to make me feel like I was at fault and inadequate. I hope she dies. I've never hated anyone so much. Tomorrow we are meeting to discuss possessions and details of the split. I think she wants to talk about what has been going on as well. I sent her a very angry text. It's going to feel like ripping open a wound, and I don't know if I'll be able to keep it together. Any advice or coping mechanisms? Has anyone else felt so strongly that they despised their spouse that they didn't trust themselves not to lose control? Update 2. I think I'm doing better. I'm not thinking about her all the time, and I'm excited to move away from this hell and get back to family and friends. But after weeks of ruminating, after discussing splitting our possessions, after really realizing that she walked away with no feeling after betraying and embarrassing me for years, this one thought still creeps into my head. She never really loved me. It sucks. It sucks because I could have spent 15 years either working on myself or finding someone who really did love me. Now I don't know when I'll be able to trust someone the way I did her again. Update 3. So, it has now been 9 months since my wife left me and I got confirmation of her infidelity. Maybe some of you remember my original post. I got to the point where I ignored flag after flag. I understand I've processed it. Some days I'm fine, but then others I still have a hard time. Today is one of those days. Every now and again I'll remember a time when she was very intimate and seemed so sweet. They were only ever when we were alone, though. The time I'm thinking of was around our 2nd year of dating, months before we moved in together. The skyline at dusk reminded me, corny as it is. She wanted to watch The Notebook with me, and so we did. I remember feeling sad and depressed that day, and I was just happy to be with her. She was so sweet. We cuddled close on the couch, had a mild night, talked, and just enjoyed each other's company. The skyline at the time we were done with the movie was orangish red, like tonight. I remember we went outside to smoke a cigarette, sitting so close, leaning on each other. You know what she said to me? I hope we die together so we can be together to the end. How does a person go from that to being automatically promiscuous and entirely forgetful of my presence immediately in a social setting, any social setting, every social setting, like flicking a switch? It's just so bizarre. Even acting embarrassed at my presence, talking over me, just being awkward. Sorry, even after 9 months, it hurts when I remember the contrasting moments. I'm really just writing this to express myself. I wish I could do what she does and just forget like it's nothing. I still recall 2 weeks after she left, she texted me, "It doesn't have to be weird just because we're not a couple anymore, like it was 15 years and we were married. How do you just do that?" Like I said, not really looking for answers. I just wanted to write how I was feeling after 9 months. I shouldn't still be thinking about this stuff.